workshop by your group. This is a very relevant and timely decision to hold this event here, and this is what I would like to explain. First of all, let me thank the organizers, and primarily the University Dauphine for support. In passing, I'm very happy to know that Dauphine is now led by former alumni, an alumni from EM Lyon and a long friend. So this is a very special occasion to thank Dauphine. I would also like to thank three people who have played a great role in this event. First of all, my longtime friend here, François Xavier, who has been initiating this research group on collaborative spaces. And in a way, he is truly an early maker. I would like to thank Julie Fabry, who has organized the event from an academic perspective, now at EM Lyon. I would like to thank Cécile Pigeon, who is around, who, as usual, has been organizing this event from an administrative perspective. So thanks to all of you. So why is this campus a unique place to hold this event? Basically, 2 years ago, a bit more than 2 years ago, EM Lyon sketched a new corporate strategy called New Territories 2020. What do we mean by new territories? We mean developing our activities in new places, new countries, new continents, in new programs, but primarily with a new mindset. A mindset whereby people would learn, would be trained, would be educated differently. This took place basically 2 years ago when we understood that our higher education system would blow up, would literally blow up, would be totally disrupted under the influences of four major pressures, which you all know: the importance of globalization, importance of accreditation, international accreditation. Nowadays, degrees are not sufficient or are not even significant in many countries. What is important is competencies and international accreditations. Third pressure is, of course, the digital transformation. And the fourth pressure is the need for business schools and universities to develop self-sustained models for growth. So we started 2 years ago with that strategy in mind. And a bit more than 1 year ago, eventually, we redefined our identity, our organizational identity, and we defined a crisper and sharper claim. So for those of you who are interested into scholarship on organizational identity, we basically defined a crisper and sharper identity, one of early makers. We decided to shift from entrepreneurship, what we had been doing for 10 years, educating entrepreneurs for the world, to fully embrace a kind of new positioning, which is early makers, embracing the makers movement or makers ideology, if you wish, or maker meaning structure. But this is what we did. You call it as you like, but this is what we did. And I'd like to tell you a bit more what we really tried to do. We are in a process of destructive creation. Okay, you all know what this means. We have decided, and we are strongly attempting, we are trying to break, to destruct a number of traditional things that have been prevalent in our domain. We are slowly moving, for me, too slowly moving. We are slowly moving from a world where students were studying by themselves alone, in silent libraries. They were learning in the evenings, in their bedrooms. They were attending passively classes, lectures in amphitheaters and classrooms. They were listening to faculty who were kind of content conveyors. They were providing, they were disseminating knowledge. Well, we are kind of trying to break this old world. and stuff. And we are looking at a new kind of people, new kind of faculty. People who would be curators of skill sets, would be curators, would orient people. Remember that nowadays in our mobile phones, we have all the knowledge that has ever been developed, right? In a mobile way. We can access it everywhere. We are developing collaborative spaces like this building. I will tell you a bit more later. We are developing learning hubs, which are so different from traditional silent libraries. And we are encouraging noise, chaos, groups work, and basically we are deeply convinced that nowadays people learn everywhere, anytime, and primarily in groups. This is what we are kind of trying to destroy. At the same time, we try to create, and I can tell you something, this kind of ambidextrous capacity to both destroy and create at the same time in a business school is a very tough job, but we are trying to do it. And basically we are trying to develop communities of students, learners, entrepreneurs who work together, who create ideas, data, actions. We are promoting hybridizations, we are promoting uncertainty. We are moving away from spaces with one unique use, amphitheaters, classrooms, libraries, cafeterias, moving in the direction of spaces with multiple uses, where you can both eat, work, study, have fun. In another building, we have rooms where students can play videos and Super Marios. Well, sounds strange, right? It works very well. They work for a while and then they return to work. So we are kind of experimenting what it means to be an early maker school. So less order, less linearity, less silence, more noise, more chaos. And you will see how the buildings are being reshaped, restructured, refurnished. This one, but also other ones in other places. We have been investing in a number of buildings in our 5 campuses. The first one in Écully, nearby Lyon, second one in Saint-Étienne, third one was opened in Casablanca in Morocco, the fourth one was opened a few months ago here in Paris, and the fifth one will be opening next March in Shanghai. We are adopting the same concept, the same rules, the same ideas. So you can see on the left-hand side the new library that was opened like 18 months ago in Écully. We have been discovering how students, learners adopted this new infrastructure, and based on their experience, we developed this building. What did we observe? We observed that almost immediately, within days, cohorts of young students totally adopted the codes that were in mind. But we also observe that depending on the places where students work, in Casablanca, in China, many Chinese students, or in France, the way they use, the way they adopt spaces vary greatly. So there is room for work, there is room for doctoral work to compare how the same material aspect, the same spaces, the same collaborative spaces, the same artifacts, in brief, how materiality is being used differently from one country to another. There is a big need to account for differences in cultures or national identities in the use of material infrastructures in higher education. Let me kind of finish with one idea. Early makers are people who take initiatives and who are ready to cross borders between disciplines, between silos. And we believe that bastards will be the winners, that in terms of spaces, infrastructures, our learners, whether the learners, students, entrepreneurs, executives, will appreciate and will learn more and more rapidly in spaces which are multiplex, which are ambiguous. As a conclusion, I would like to call for you to continue your very interesting research. I would like to call for, again, researches on materiality spaces which fully take into account the diversity of approaches to time, space, colors, objects, and artifacts worldwide. What we have observed so far is that the way we developed our infrastructures in Casablanca and in China have non-anticipated effects. We did not fully understand how our students behave, and basically they are adopting these infrastructures in innovative ways, at least in ways that we had not anticipated. So I'm really calling for multinational or comparative approaches to these topics. I would be very happy throughout the morning and during the lunch to have a visit of the different floors in this building. There are 4 floors, which are pretty much different, with different spaces. I'll be very, very happy to organize visits with my colleagues. And I hope that by the end of the day, you will understand why this is a unique place for you to start this international conference. So thank you. I will drop my hat of associate for research and take my other hat of scholar very interested into learning what you are doing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I'm not used to up-to-date technologies, at least in my own university. Oops, it's recorded. Too late. And it's not this one. And then it's this one. So first of all, I want to say a warm thank you to IM Lyon Business School for hosting our events. Thank you very much, Philippe, for hosting this event. It's an amazing opportunity to talk about collaborative spaces in the context of a collaborative space, a very innovative collaborative space. And I think we all look forward to visiting it and to discover all the innovations that are in this amazing building. As an introduction, I want to say a few words about the network and the context which is behind this event. Why are we here? And I could say a lot of things about the research group on collaborative spaces. I could say that it deals with co-workers, makers, hackers, collaborative communities, and how they relate to new work practices. That looking at these spaces, these places, these practices, it's understanding a lot of things about innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on. I could say that it's both, at least it aims at being both an academic network, a global academic network with local chapters in Paris, Barcelona, London, Montreal, and so on. And at the same time, I could say that it also aims at having an impact. Many people who join us want to write paper, do good, interesting academic research, but they also want to have an impact, and that's what we try to do. And I could also say that the network produces 2 kinds of things collectively, a research summary every 2 years, and I could also say that it produces a white paper every year, which has been put online yesterday. But I prefer to present the network through the people who are at the heart of it. And I think that the best way to talk about RGCS, it's not to talk about RGCS. Let's be a rumor organization. Maybe it's better this way. And first of all, I want to talk about this person, Julie Fabry, which is really at the beginning of the adventure. And I will use a couple of metaphors to describe this person at the heart of the network. And for me, it's the angel, the guardian angel. In one of our documents, we describe the function of community manager, saying that it is becoming something extremely important, not only for RGCS, but for our broader academic community. And for me, Julie is really the epitome of what we are talking about, a community manager. And I really envy EM Lyon for having the chance every day to have such a colleague. And two other very important people, let's call them the energizers, two very important persons. Stefan Effliger with us today. An amazing person, always optimistic, full of positive energy about even a crazy project. Let's go to Berlin to meet strange people, hackers. Yeah, good idea. It's cool. Let's go. Let's do it. Okay. And Anna Glaser, another very important energizer, who for the best reason in the world is not with us today. Other important person, Aurore Dandois, facilitator, connecting a lot of people, always in a very sweet way, subtle way. David Valla, let's call him the inspirer, is always a lot of ideas. I like to work with people with whom I share and through whom I will learn a lot. And working with David, even having a short chat with David, it's always an amazing opportunity to learn a lot of things. A few words about Pierre Laniret, let's call him the visionary, always with good ideas, some distance about what is going on, theories and so on, about the governance of the network and other ideas. Let's talk about Sabine Carton. I think it's always good to have in a team someone who takes a temporal distance, some distance. François, slow down, take time, and the others, and creating a cool atmosphere and bubble. And Sabine, a very old friend, is like this. Alban, with the managerial rigor, reminding sometimes the outside world, managerial expectation, and it's good in this context. The two innovators from Montreal, I think it's good to travel when we try to innovate, to have the opportunity, even in a discussion, to travel very far and to have Montreal context and the opportunity to chat with Viviane Sergi and Annie Camus. It's a great way also to take some distance about what we do. I call her the fairy because we are in a world now in which it's important to visualize things. And I've met in my life very few people who have this talent to make a complex idea visual for a PPT, a white paper, or a research note. And really, this person is absolutely amazing. It's a continuous surprise. So it's Amélie Boas, which is beyond many documents that we produce. The guide. Of course, some people will understand why, for many people in the group, it's important to have someone very good at space in Sydney or elsewhere. But I'm also meaning something else about a guide. We are Francophone in the French-speaking world. We try also to diffuse ideas in the English-speaking world. And Anouk is absolutely fantastic for this, to understand other codes which sometimes we do not understand at all, the Anglo-Saxon world. So it's also a guide in this sense. So I could have mentioned a lot of other people. I wanted to insist on the people who were particularly involved in these events. So I could have mentioned other coordinators or people involved in the context of other events. Sorry for not having mentioned all of them. But I just wanted to say that RGCS is this name, these pictures, these people. And now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Bastien Lange, who will talk about makers, maker spaces, and introduce a very interesting idea, the idea of co-creation, which is many times used in the context of electronic platforms. And if we talk about it, correct me if I am wrong, in the context of maker spaces, we're in the context of EM Lyon Business School. So with this early makers ambition, we're in the context of a maker space. So I think that what Bastien will tell us may be very, very interesting, both for the context and for all of us. Thank you, Bastien, for having accepted our invitation.
comme ça? C'est ça? Super. Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour m'inviter à Paris. Merci François, Philippe et Julie d'avoir la possibilité de parler ici sur cette conférence. Malheureusement, je ne parle pas très bien français, c'est pour cela que je vais changer en anglais. So thanks a lot for the very kind invitation and the opportunity to join this conference and to come to Paris and to talk to you about collaborative makerspaces, arenas for alternative modes of value creation. With my talk, I'm aiming at introducing variations of makerspaces and its collaboratively generated spaces. Oh. Will it move somehow? Do you have the pin to continue to? No, it's affiché. This one? Sorry for... Put the microphones down there, and on the other hand, the presentation doesn't continue, so maybe we try once more. Should we shut it down and start one new? So I will demonstrate how these social and physical spaces generate value and prototypical artifacts. I will discuss what we can expect from maker spaces within the context, and I think this is very crucial for me, of various urban, ecological, and economic crises. And I don't say challenges, but I say crises. And this is also important to me because there's great attention now towards the effects of and the expectations of maker spaces, but there's a little bit less discussion. Why do we need them? For what, in what context, in what kind of world do we live? But it's there, you know. I can, yeah. Okay. No, we would. Try to have it in a full view, and then I'm So I relate the enormous increase of hundreds of maker spaces in respect to alternative economies, as you see it here with the change from a motor production site to a bicycle production place in Detroit, to alternative economies and post-growth societies. Maker spaces, its do-it-yourself and do-it-together attitude per se are not new. No, it's not okay. It's too big. You should... Okay, let's leave it like this. Which one? This one? Okay. Now we're on. Okay. Sorry for that. With my talk, I'm interested to better understand the direct and indirect effects of these mainly bottom-up initiatives, their rootedness in thematic scenes, and their contingency for alternative modes of value creation. My empirical and conceptual background regarding this topic stems from an ongoing 3-year project called COWERK, funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research. The title is Collaborative Peer Networks in Open Workshops. We are interested to find out to what degree open workshop and makerspaces can contribute to post-growth and green economies. We analyze these spaces, their value-generating configurations, and their transitional spaces and practices. From a more practical perspective, I have initiated a series of temporary makerspaces, so-called innovation workshops, between 2013 and 15 in Gubin, in the state of Brandenburg, at the border to Poland, a region that is driven by demographic and economic shrinkage. We have implemented a collaborative platform to feed demands that have been articulated by local SMEs. They were prototyped by students from Brandenburg. Another case where I was and will be involved is Birmingham, where the city university expanded into an adjacent neighborhood called Digbeth. Here, the BCU will establish a so-called STEAM house, a makerspace, a cross-disciplinary platform that embraces serendipity, an experimental hub. Based on these premises, I define makerspaces as open workshops, a synonym for different thematic initiatives that are organized bottom-up. Its social architecture is situational, unfinished. They host resources, materials, and tools, and generate surplus. What do makerspaces stand for? I think makerspaces tell a broader story on collective autonomy, motives of reclaiming production patterns, relevant tools to do, to fix, and to transform things in your everyday life with the help of a social collaborative network. Maybe I think we should also shift a bit our attention to what we call frugal innovation and their social movements, and not just to the fancy effects of 3D maker printers. So thematic workshops and makerspaces are alternative mobility workshops, for instance here, bike kitchens, building community-based post-carbon mobility options, but also repair cafes and neighborhood workshops founded in Netherlands, Fab Labs, open digital labs, here a case in Berlin, but also Fab Labs in Kenya, Nairobi, open workshops for printing, analog printing, here an example also in Berlin, but also temporal gatherings, the Maker Faire movement here in my home region at Lake Constance, but also kind of a staged makerspaces here in the case of Otto Bock, a global player for protothesis, here seeking to get closer to a fabbing scene and their ideas and their technologies and competences in the case of Berlin. But also open makerspaces differ regarding size, here a pop-up makerspace in China, or China even that is updating its industrial, or at least aiming at updating its industrial sector with the help of makerspaces, but also regarding permanent, temporal, or ephemeral makerspaces. So to sum this up, the phenomena of makerspaces is chaotic. It's emerging at many crisis-induced social, economic, and agricultural, and even spatial contexts. Makerspaces are real and practical. It's mixing analog competencies with digital, and especially the digital era is feedback in the world of atoms. Regardless the plurality of and the thematic focuses, different regarding size and various institutional setups, my thesis for the following presentation is: makerspaces demonstrate new elements of transformation, of a transformation design, pointing toward future post-growth societies. Their configurations shed light on alternative transitional pathways out of ecological, economic, consumptive, social and infrastructural crisis. Makerspaces are not utopian models, as we know it, for instance, from the green movement of the 1970s and 80s, but tools that operate in the real world and in real time. They represent a broad range of alternative solutions against the miseries of failed market and state policies, failed national economies, and corporate as well as industrial policies. They contain the transformation design for aspects of repairing, reclaiming, and relocating essential assets, making a good life. Of course, this is a very optimistic thesis, but to the end of this catastrophic year, I think we deserve it. Nevertheless, I will be critical toward some of the running discussions that on the one hand either allocate many of these initiatives in the corner of social affairs and social innovation and ignore their radical political potential. On the other hand, I'm skeptical toward those trying to capitalize makerspaces, here in the case of Red Bull, by merging makers into the corporate world. This is corporate pleasure politics, trying to amuse bored workers in rather inflexible organizations and moving closer with mobile labs here in this case to designated consumers. Being loyal to my perspective, terminologies to analyze, to contextualize and to describe the logics that emerge of makerspaces should be carefully used. So the following picture that I will present to you is by no means a coherent, finished one. It will contain congruencies, dissonances, and loose ends that should stimulate our conceptual work today and in the next days. So far, the following societal discourses and debates circle around 4 questions if makerspaces can be considered as initiatives that repair the world based on open source and do-it-yourself practices, that are bottom-up hubs that reclaim production based on peer networks, replacing economy, an economy that is based on hierarchies and control without meeting the demands of the people, but only few elites. Or is it, and the third one is a collaborative network that are in search for degrowth and alternative ways of a good life, conviviality, overcoming severe effects of the cold age of neoliberalism and austerity policies. There's a growing scene of collaboratively organized platforms with subsequent cooperations in the field of fintech and other sectors. A more knowledge-based discourse, the last one here, sees makerspaces as institutional interfaces in the educational system. Here is the case as well, but also the Birmingham City University, as I have presented. All these first-hand explanations address aspects of social innovation, network-based production modes, knowledge spillovers, and so on. So my research interest is to describe the constitutive features of this new type of self-organized workspaces. I'm concerned to detect the complexity of socio-material formations of emerging post-growth economies. Therefore, I think new, attentive analytical reconstructions are needed to adequately capture the variety and complexity of these heterodox spaces, their relational causation, contingent procedures, surplus of latency, and peculiar power relations. It is particularly important to avoid the reductionism and inherent to former theoretical approaches towards unorthodox economic activities, as we could observe it in the field and the discussion on culture and creative industries. In doing so, I think standard epistemic tools to the social science and economics have been rendered unfit, and new ones should be addressed in more detail. So far, only few attempts try to understand the apparent social and economic hybridity of temporary arrangements of work, including their place-relatedness. In doing so, I approach makerspaces as urban assemblage. These urban micro-businesses, micro-productivity as Hartley named it, their digital niche production with 3D printing and internet-based services demonstrate limited profit orientation, but important social aims that extends into the world of atoms. They represent more creativity than the social economy of former times did, as they have a strong bias towards experiments, serendipity, and trial and error attitudes. Furthermore, makerspaces do not demonstrate closed social ideals created by alternative or scene-based green economies as we know it from the 1980s. In contrast to the rather closed circles of the former communing, makerspaces are in favor of open access for everyone. In this respect, they might pave the way for future models of small-scale production that might be addressed as post-growth or humanized capitalism. But what about the value creation and profit-making? How flexible is value creation? Where and when is it applied in the course of collaborative working and the emerging of more or less experimental approaches towards relating industrial production to elements of craft and social community building? Based on these questions mentioned above, I will focus shortly on the relationships between social and economic elements involved in the practice of makerspaces. Secondly, I'm aiming at identifying characteristic points of departure of value creation between the extremes of serving as an ornament to social projects, backed by other material support, and providing important opportunities to survive economically and develop further these new types of work. Thirdly, based on recent empirical explorations, I will present three key elements, patterns, so to say, of value creation in makerspaces. And I think so far linear models of value creation shaped after industrial commodity production would not work in this case at all. The practical activities in makerspaces do not have a standardized point of value creation. Rather, time, materials, interim products and services that contributed to the making of such an artifact varied in temporally and socially. They often depended on persons who took initiative and their perspective on a distinct problem-solving procedure. Such configurations, rather than strings of or lines of value creation, are hard to reconstruct analytically. Broad descriptions of value shops, for instance, entered by fixed types of agents negotiating the quality of what has been produced on value of product or service under planning, often missed the point of variability and the peculiar social embeddedness that informed many activities in these fields. The same with the shifting roles performed by one and the same agent. The prosumer idea not provided is, I think, more analytically helpful. So I will present shortly three principles of value configuration in makerspaces. One major prerequisite of such configurations of value creation is the principle of trial and error. It applies to the search of new ideas, artifacts, prototypes, modes of collaboration, combination of heterogeneous activities, new sources of income, and so on. This implies an attitude not to be surprised when something unexpected appears, but being aware that a given pattern to solve problems might not work. Makers demonstrate a kind of naive openness toward newness, being emancipated from an educational master plan. Secondly, protagonists in makerspaces know how to practically handle latency. Latency means to regain time upon the procedures of value creation, testing, trying something out, and discarding it again is a subtle practice of makerspaces. Time autonomy is a key issue, not only regarding the prolongation of time, but also the speeding up, as we see it, for instance, in hackathons and thinkathons. Practically speaking, material and immaterial resources may be wasted, many ideas do not become realized, and many options never find their way into valorization. Latency, thus, is a main pillar of flexible value creation, more so than in standardized value creation, occurring along the predefined line of industrial lines of assembly. Such altered modes of value creation, to a certain extent, also mirror openness as a guiding principle of post-growth modes of working. What originally had been claimed for industries under technology pressure, for instance with the open innovation aspect and a less restricted interaction of an enterprise with its environment, now extends into other types of work as well. Third one, open access to knowledge, technologies, tools, and the master plans of goods characterizes much of the makerspace's scenery. Yet one major difference is this one. It comes in not in by economic pressure or design, but in the first place by a social logic of sufficiency and autonomy. This includes preferences and deliberate choice of activities, aims and procedures that might be declared non-economic within another context. This social element of sufficiency and autonomy in turn implies other types of workings of power than those provided by economic structuration, especially by organizational hierarchy or economic networks that involve different degrees of hierarchy. Trial and error, levels of latency, and social norms such as equity, sufficiency, as I pointed out, and autonomy require more sophisticated types of power, often built by self-acquired knowledge, proficiency, growing professionalism, opinion leadership, and natural authority by doing. This potentially increases variability of value creation, leaving it to social configuration and their consent with what to produce for profit, where and when to do it. In some, makerspaces are arenas, social arenas, where practices and social tools for collaboration are explored at all, tested in a trial and error attitude that in turn accelerates relevant co-produced knowledge, community-based networks and competencies. Structural autonomy and playful modes of experimentation, hidden fields of interest, and in a motivation of a reappropriated tools to fix things, to repair, to transform unused items. Those combinations transport two aspects. The first one, makerspaces operate in real-time conditions with real problems, but are at the same time utopian-driven. And second, the crossing of different technologies, materials, crowds, competencies generate serendipity effects. It is exactly this moment that raises the attention of the corporate sector, large educational institutions, as we've heard also here, and cities. Will such economic projects narrow down the scope of experimentation and learning? Makerspaces and open workshops seek to enhance it. They create settings or assemblages of agents, infrastructures, technologies, materials, and ideas that foster trial and error routines and encourage their participants to rely on their own capacities. In some, the embeddedness of value creation through latency and decoupled power relations guarantees for the continual regeneration of creative capacity that is needed to make makerspaces sustainable, socially rewarded, and capable for further economic development, if so desired, if you want it. It is exactly this gray zone, that positioning between the lines, that raises the interest of established institutions. The ephemeral value approach to value creation has been developed by many open workshop and maker spaces. It seems to predestine them for getting filed under the residual category of alternative economy. So thereby the following aspects are crucial. Openness regarding open source technologies and accessibility for almost all. Sharing, providing resources. Collaboration, knowing how to organize spaces and to curate them. Spaces that allows experiments. All of these 4 dimensions contribute to what we call a collaborative ecosystem. If we scale up this phenomenon, or all these elements that speak of a larger process, I think that we've called a transformational phase. I use the term transformation design to highlight that probably every part of our life, our cities, our economy, must be changed to cope with existing challenges. The term design is not meant in an aesthetic understanding, but in a holistic approach where we must invent practical options with less, as we call it, a new reduced modernity. And as a matter of fact, I want to mention 10 aspects at the very end, very shortly, in a kind of a normative way, what we think is important if you want to initiate a makerspace. Create fields of play, fields of empathy. Prototype evidence, so be very concrete in the first instance to show what you want to do. Consider the community to be a catalyst for co-designing makerspaces. Be site-specific, so not address any kind of unrelated, unspecific, delocalized problem, but be very site-specific here. Students that were working in a post-carbon, towards a post-carbon region in a former brownfield area. Be very simple and act. Don't think too much in the very beginning, just start. Open playful coding spaces for girls and boys. So there's a gender aspect. I haven't touched it so far, but I think you should be very critical how, the group is organized and who's joining and not. Fields of play, as I mentioned in the very beginning, are very crucial. Empathy is also important, but approaching substantial global challenges are essential. So be very specific. Why do you need this to solve what kind of relevant problem? I think that also from a spatial perspective, you can use temporary spaces as facilitators for awareness and place building in urban development. Here, friends of us have done this in Basel. Also try to combine craftsmanship with entrepreneurship. And for those who haven't yet a Christmas present, you can access makerspaces and print out and get even, layered chocolate. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah. There's a microphone somewhere. Shall I get?
You mentioned in your presentation that these initiatives of developing maker spaces, collaborative maker spaces, are bottom-up initiatives. But my feeling is that there are also public policies supporting the development of these spaces. So there is something which is bottom-up, but there are also public policies tending to maybe find solutions or help emerging new businesses or helping people to develop some things, which are more top-down maybe, but not related to the companies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is right, but my empirical approach is to really address sort of the inner logics of those bottom-up initiatives. And I know that there's a worldwide movement now to capture and to try to integrate them either in the corporate sector, as I've shown with Red Bull, or into other educational parts. This is to a certain degree nice, but I want to be very loyal to look closer. What are sort of the inner mechanisms, that have been developed by by occasion, by a demand, by a global world rule that I think this is now needed because no other public institution or larger institution sort of is offering these opportunities to do something and to start to repair the world, as they put it on the title, you know. So, and I think there's a self-learned mechanism that is not that easily to transfer into a system of hierarchy, an organization that is based on hierarchy and that has specific goals, you know, to fulfill and all these things. So if there are cases where sort of the public hand is supporting bottom-up initiatives without sort of, well, destroying them in the first instance when they're approaching them, this is very nice. But I know very few examples that maker spaces can be upscaled to a larger extent. And I think if you ask in detail and look closer, if you have where maker spaces that have been organized bottom up have been upscaled by themselves or with the help of others, then this would be a very interesting empirical case. But so far, I think there are the corporate sector and many others trying to making use of those aesthetic attitudes, spatial arrangements in order to create an attractive environment within the corporate world or the educational system. This is not bad, it's not wrong. But I think I was trying to be very loyal to my empirical case that are these bottom-up initiatives. Their motivations, their inner logics, and there are sort of there's fine lines, you know, dealing with time. A hierarchy, an organization is expecting something as an outcome, as a product, because they have to deliver. Those self-organized spaces where there is no expectation from, you know, to fulfill an economic goal, so to say. But for sure they create reputation, they create some revenues and some income, but in a different social context than an organizational one or a public one.
Good morning. Hello, I'm here. I think I understand the different approach to action of the corporate hackers and makers, meaning that, and all the epistemological consequences, meaning that you need to promote a different approach of learning, trial and error, and latency, as you said. But why do you think it's so important to also add and have a political agenda, like you insist on, it's not an utopia, but the idea is to go beyond the neoliberalism, and why is it so important for you?
Okay, to a certain extent there's a broad discussion that makerspaces are able to print out fancy iPhone shells for, and they celebrate this. This is sort of a very naive understanding what is coming out of, you know, those guys, these hipsters, they know how to fix the things and to deal with a 3D printer that are affordable now. And I think it's a bit naive because the closer you look, you see very, well, substantial, thoughtful, and practical activities, for instance, with the mobility aspects. This is, you know, to reorganize local mobility in respect to the problems posed by the logistics sector, you know, and sort of the CO2 emissions they produce. I think it's a very valuable contribution, and my interest is simply to better understand these logics in order to tell a more complex story than maker spaces, it's put it in a nutshell, are places where you can print out things for your iPhone shell. I mean, this is a bit one of the superficial stories that circle around in the public discussion, why these maker spaces are also of interest, and why sort of the corporate sector seems to be closer to getting to them. So I just want to put my attention to these motivations and to frame them within a specific context, and they're very practical initiatives trying to repair the world. Put it very simple. It sounds super naive, but they start to do good things, and I think this is important.
Hi, so thank you. My question is also along that line, that if these are more bottom-up and you're trying to be very loyal to that autonomous process, then how is their attitude towards these corporates kind of piggybacking on that aesthetic, on that process, and do you think they abide by different markets in a way? That makes sense.
This is a very difficult question because I also, well, analytically, I think, as I said, the question of upscaling, you know, how can you generate a business out of a social movement type of organization? I think there are restrictions and obstacles inscribed in the logics of a social movement. They don't speak for an easy way to upscale. Also dealing with open source aspects and non-profit transfer of, well, goods, I think makes it very complicated to incorporate into the framework of an entrepreneurial perspective or a classical entrepreneur-driven or company-driven perspective. But maybe models such as social entrepreneurships are of importance, you know, to look closer. So in order to pay more attention to the question of profit making and to ask to what degree a collaboratively generated set of values are equally distributed and what kind of models are relevant from an entrepreneurial perspective. And you should teach these models, you know, of social entrepreneurialism here. So
we have time for our last question, and then we will have to move to the academic sessions.
Hi, thank you. That was a really interesting presentation, and I really liked your point about decoupling power relations to facilitate creativity and innovation. And I guess my question is, you hinted at it a little bit. You said there were gender issues, you know, gender dynamics. But what I've also noticed is that these are heavily white spaces as well. So if we're really talking about decoupling power relations and trying to fix the world, why is it white bodies, and predominantly white male bodies, that are fixing the world and having access to these bottom-up spaces? So how bottom-up and how decoupled are these power relations?
yeah, this is a very good point. I was trying to make the presentation shorter yesterday night, and I was sort of taking out some slides. There's a very challenging project called Kukula in Germany, where sort of migrants are start to act as craftsmen and learn this, and it's a very integrative project. So if you expand the variety of, you know, other more social inclusive maker spaces, they exist. My interest today was a bit closer to look at some internal mechanism and not just to extend the range of makerspace and just to add, you know, now the gender-related makerspaces and the migrant-related makerspace and all these stuff. There are interesting initiatives, and I think the more in more detail you look, the more you find on these aspects. But in that respect, you're completely right. I wasn't touching sort of these aspects in more detail.
Thank you very, very much, Bastien, for this very stimulating and perfectly adapted keynote. Thank you. So it's time now to move to the sessions. Looking forward to our discussions. On bouge.